The two biggest competing neighborhoods in Aledo are probably Walsh Ranch and Parks of Aledo, which might surprise you because they are fairly different, but most people who look at one also look at the other. So today we are going to cover the differences and take these neighborhoods head to head. My name's Jared with Living in Aledo, and I've had clients move from Walsh Ranch to Parks of Aledo, and I've had clients move from Parks of Aledo to Walsh Ranch. I've had clients come in town initially thinking they want to buy in Parks of Aledo and end up in Walsh. And I've had it happen the exact opposite. So there's lots about these neighborhoods that are there to like. There's some stuff that you might not like. And that's what today's video is about. We're going to cover carrying costs. We're going to cover location, neighborhood vibe, build out, schools, and so much more. So if you are thinking about relocating to the area, watch the video, hit that subscribe button, and reach out if you have a trip planned. But with that, we're going to get into the list. Okay, first up on the list is a topic that unfortunately I cannot take personal credit for, but this is going to be the carrying cost comparison. And now in other neighborhoods, I just talk about the difference in carrying costs. We talk about what's more expensive, what's less expensive. These two neighborhoods, it's actually a pretty unique dynamic because of what that means for you. So Walsh Ranch has an HOA that is for single family homes somewhere between $2,100 and $3,000 a year. And then it has a tax rate, which includes the PID of about 2.55%. So I'm not going to do too much math, but I'm going to give you the gross numbers on that. Parks of Aledo has an HOA of $600 per year and a tax rate of 2.2%. So it has a lower HOA and a lower tax rate. So what that means is for the same price home, you have a lower carrying cost. And so this impacts you a couple of different ways. I had a client who recently ended up buying in Parks of Aledo. And what he realized was that for the same carrying cost, right? So if he factored in the difference in the HOA and the taxes, and he said, okay, well, there's a $3,000 a year difference for the same price point home, or for the same home in general. What if I used that spread and I applied that to what I could afford in my mortgage? He realized, and I did the math for the video, is that you can buy about an extra $150,000 on your mortgage. So an extra $150,000 on the home purchase, and you'll have the same carrying cost approximately. So that would be like, okay, in Walsh, I can buy a $900,000 home, or in Parks of Aledo, I can buy a $1,050,000 home and have the same monthly expense. So that's pretty unique in a couple of ways, because additionally in Parks of Aledo, for the same price, you typically get a slightly nicer home, or you can, right? So I've had this play out two different ways. I've had one client that was focusing on Walsh, and when I started talking about the differences and what they could do, they actually had me run comps on 4 different homes in Walsh that they were interested in. And then they came back and said, hey, Jared, we're so sorry we made you do that. We actually want this home in Parks of Aledo. And as we discussed it, I realized, and they shared, is that they realized, and I'll mention them again, is that because they didn't have kids, the amenities weren't that important to them. They wanted the nicest home they could get for their budget. So their budget was about $700,000, $650,000, $700,000. And so they could get a nicer home for the same price in Parks of Aledo. And then I had another client that he did the math on figuring out like the carrying cost. So, he was looking at spending, somewhere around $850 on the higher end. And he realized that he could spend an extra $150 to $175-ish and the carrying cost would be the same. So he got a double benefit, basically the same monthly expense. He got a nicer home for the base level cost, but he also was able to increase his purchase price and keep the same carrying cost as if he'd spent it in Walsh. So he got a home that was just over $1 million. And this home was way nicer than he thought he was going to get in Walsh. So that's an interesting dynamic, right? So you can buy the same home, have a lower carrying cost, and it's still probably a little bit nicer. Or you can increase your purchase price, keep the same carrying cost as if you bought a lower price home in Walsh, and have a much nicer home. So something to think about as you begin your process. And there's lots more than just the niceness of the home to consider. We're gonna talk about schools, we're gonna talk about amenities, we're gonna talk about just the HOA, we're gonna talk about other stuff as well, location, vibe. But if you are prioritizing the house itself and you think about your carrying cost instead of your actual purchase price, so like the monthly cost to buy the home, that's an interesting dynamic where you can really kind of play with the numbers and really kind of see the difference between, okay, if I buy in Walsh versus if I buy in Parks of Aledo. So let's jump into the rest of the video as well. Okay, let's get into the location and like the neighborhood vibe. So Walsh is going to be closer to downtown Fort Worth. If you are working out of Fort Worth, living in Walsh is probably going to save you 5 to 7 minutes each direction every day. It's going to feel like its own little suburb of Fort Worth as opposed to like Aledo as a whole being a suburb of Fort Worth. I mentioned in another video, I've actually heard it recently, so it's really sticking in my head. I have friends who live in Parks of Aledo telling friends who live in Walsh they live in fake Aledo. It's a joke. We're all in Aledo. But that is a difference in the feel, is if you want to feel centric to Aledo. You want to be like, oh, hey, I want to go eat at Jake's Burgers. I want to go to Dane's Barbecue. I want to swing by and grab lunch when I'm working from home from yesterday's sandwich shop. Parks of Aledo is going to be way more convenient if you want to use and experience what's actually in Aledo and the Aledo area. Whereas Walsh is going to be more convenient if you live in and work out of the Fort Worth area. If your kids go to school in a private school in Fort Worth, or you go to church in Fort Worth and you work in Fort Worth and you're driving to Fort Worth every day anyways, Walsh could be a little better fit for you based on the location and kind of that vibe. Now, you are also going to be a little bit closer to like the H-E-B and the Costco and Brookshire's if you're in Parks of Aledo versus Walsh. You're going to have another exit length you'd have to drive. So that's going to be a little bit different. Living in Parks of Aledo is going to feel more like you live in Aledo, as opposed to like, oh, I live in Walsh so my kids can go to Aledo school district stuff. And then when it comes to like the neighborhood feel, so it's a little bit different than location, but the vibe of the neighborhood is that on average, lots in Parks of Aledo are about 20% larger than lots in Walsh. Now, you can get the exact same size lot in Walsh and Parks of Aledo, but this is just average. What's your normal expectation? You're looking at somewhere around, 0.16 or 0.17 versus 0.2. Like, these are all less than a quarter acre, essentially. Like, the biggest chunk of them in all the neighborhoods, less than a quarter acre. But are you looking at 0.16 or are you looking at 0.19 or 0.2 or 0.21? So you're not going to feel quite as on top of each other in Parks of Aledo for the most part, but none of these lots are particularly large, and the largest ones in Parks of Aledo sell pretty quick, and for the most part I do think they're all already sold. So we're going to talk about amenities and more in a moment, so stick around. But if you have any questions or if there's anything I brought up and didn't answer clearly, put those questions in the comment section below. Okay, so we already talked about like the HOA cost difference, and that's going to correlate to a very different level of amenities. So basically in Parks of Aledo, you have no amenities, right? You have parks and you have some green space and you have the Parks of Aledo trails. Those are not owned by the HOA. The trails are not owned by the HOA. Those are public trails so that anybody can use them. But you have that capped HOA. So if you're looking for a pool, you're going to have to make friends or build your own, right? We have clients and friends who are about to build their own pool. That's not cheap right now. And so if you want amenities, if you want the neighborhood pool, you want the athletic facility, you want the tennis courts, you want the dog parks. There's actually a dog park in Parks of Aledo. But if you want like all those amenities, you want the makerspace, you want the neighborhood gardens, all that, Walsh. There's literally no comparison if you want neighborhood amenities. That is something that a lot of people do have to really figure out because they are moving into a neighborhood with an HOA and they just kind of expect a neighborhood to have a pool or something like that. And actually, I've had clients go both ways. Initially, they think Walsh and they end up in Parks of Aledo. I had clients initially thinking Parks of Aledo and they end up in Walsh. So I can give both sides of it. I have a client who just loved Walsh, but he's like, we needed a pool and we did not want to spend $125, $150 on a pool. So he's like, man, like in his opinion, Parks of Aledo, it was a big miss not putting a neighborhood pool in there, right? Now, what would that have done to the HOA cost? I don't know. Would that have changed the vibe? Maybe. So they decided on Walsh. And then I had another client, like I mentioned previously, when they discovered the difference in the holding costs and the value and like what they could get for their money, they didn't have kids. They decided amenities were not that important and they wanted to buy a nicer home with the same dollars. So that's something to think about. Is the community amenities very important to you or lower on the importance list? If they're very important, Walsh should be where you start. If they're less important and you're like, I don't want to go swim with a bunch of people I don't know. If you're like, it's like, I want to work out in my own garage. I don't want to use a bunch of equipment that other people have sweated on. I'm just, from that perspective, maybe that's how you feel. Then Walsh isn't the top of your list, and maybe Parks is. If you're like, hey, I'm a homebody and I just want to in a home that I love, you're going to get a little more bang for your buck. So in mixing topics a little bit right now, you kind of have to decide what's important. Walsh is a clear winner when it comes to actual amenities offered, if those amenities are important to you. So we're going to talk about like neighborhood maturity and some other stuff in schools coming up. So stick around. It is more than just amenities and like value or what you get for your money. Okay, so anytime you're talking about new construction neighborhoods, you do need to talk about the neighborhood maturity and the kind of the construction build out process and what that looks like and what to expect. So unlike the Kelly Ranch video, both of these neighborhoods are well into their development stages. However, there is one significant difference if you're unfamiliar with the area, and that is that Parks of Aledo is a much smaller neighborhood. There's 4 small sections, 4 primary sections, one tiny little section that's making it a 5th section. But the first 2 sections are fully built out. The 3rd section, the Bluffs, is like 90 to 95% built out. There is a handful of lots still available that you could build in there. And then the last section, the Lakes, is in process, probably 50-ish% built out. And these aren't huge sections. So, you are going to see completion and construction stopping much sooner in Parks of Aledo than in Walsh. I was talking to Brian Job, and he thinks that probably the Lakes will be totally complete within 2 years. He's like, man, I'm going to figure out somewhere else to build homes. I love building homes over here, and I'll have to find somewhere else to start building. So Parks of Aledo, you're probably looking at about a 2-year timeline before construction is completely done. And if you don't buy new construction and you buy in one of the completed sections of the neighborhood, they're really totally separate sections. So you could go into and out of the first 2 sections and never experience any level of construction traffic other than people coming in kind of the main thoroughfare right there. So that's one thing to think about. Bailey Ranch that cuts across the high school and kind of connects all of the sections of Parks of Aledo. Now, we did talk about this in the other video, but Walsh Ranch is an enormous community, right? If you haven't seen it, go check out my video on everything you need to know about Walsh Ranch or the pros and cons of Walsh Ranch. It's enormous. Like Quail Valley or whatever, like the overall development of the whole area, not just like the homes, is enormous. It spans from where it is now. It goes south, it goes past 20, it goes past 30, it goes past 20, into south of 20 to the railroad track. So there's going to be all sorts of commercial development down on the south side. UT Arlington West. So UT West is going to go in there between the 20 and 30 intersection. That's going to be in Walsh, on like Walsh, Quail Ranch, Walsh Valley, whatever property. That's part of it. You have mixed use development going in along 20 as part of it. So you have a ton of stuff going on there. So you're going to be in and around construction for, I'm going to say, a decade. Right? You're probably going into 2035, but like, that's not like, oh, I'm going to be in an active construction zone. No, that's just all going to be going on around there. And some of the negatives will also be experienced by Parks of Aledo residents. So if you live in Parks of Aledo and you go to Fort Worth for work, you're going to be driving through 20, you're going to be passing all that traffic, you're going to be passing the construction, just like Walsh. And now the highway construction, you're better positioned at Walsh than you are Parks of Aledo if you're going into Fort Worth, but that's really not neighborhood construction. So that's something to think about, right? But there's still large portions of Walsh Ranch that you can go, you can buy a pre-existing home, or you can buy home on a new construction home on a street that's almost near completion. Not that big a deal, but that is a difference. Parks of Aledo is near completion. Probably the next 2 years, you'll be done with construction. Walsh Ranch, nowhere near completion, but that does have areas like phases that are completed. So something to note, there's going to be negatives associated with the continued development of Walsh Ranch, but there's going to be positives associated with that as well. You're going to be very close to lots of mixed use space, commercial space, restaurants, retail, all that stuff eventually, just not right now. Okay, well, let's talk about schools. And unlike Kelly Ranch versus Walsh Ranch, we're going to talk about middle school and high schools and really not the elementary schools, because Walsh has its own Walsh Elementary and Parks of Aledo is literally right next to Coder. There's like no world that I see them ever not being Coder Elementary. So where's the difference? What's going to happen? Like, what's the big difference here? Currently, they both feed into McAnally Middle School, which is on the north side of 20, which is kind of a pain for Parks of Aledo people. But with the growth in the school district, that will likely change at some point. I don't think that'll stay there that way long term. And so I would expect there to be a rezoning of the middle school at some point with a new middle school going in, maybe in between 20 and Parks of Aledo. That would be my best guess. And so Parks of Aledo would have a new middle school that would be closer to them and more convenient. So currently not convenient. You would get a more convenient option, but that would mean you were rezoned. So if it happened in the middle, like a middle of your kid being in middle school, that might not be a super positive thing. So that's kind of maybe a hit against Parks of Aledo. Well, let's jump to the high school option. That one's a bigger variable, a bigger question mark, and probably more important because I have a video on the future of Aledo ISD. Go check that out if you want. But there's like a bajillion page demographic report where the school district's going, the growth that's happening, the schools that will be needed. And at some point, they're going to have to do something about the high school. Does that mean second high school? Does that mean splitting out the grades? Does that mean a technical school before they do a high school? Something. Well, if another high school is built, the only place that really makes sense for is going to be over near Walsh and Morningstar. So that would mean that if you're in Walsh, you will likely end up at the new high school. Now, when could that happen? I would say no earlier than 2030 or 2031. And I'm not saying it will happen then, I'm saying no earlier. The demographic report says that by 2030 or 2031, Aledo High School, the current high school, will be maxing out its capacity. So they're probably going to put this off as long as possible. They probably will not do it right then, but that's something to think about. You know, if your kids are younger and, you know, they're going to be in high school after that point, they may not end up in the current high school. Maybe they try to do a combined athletic program. Maybe they don't. Maybe there's only one football program. Who knows? But that's something to think about. That would be a ding against Walsh in this, in my personal perspective. So something to think about. There will be growth. It is unlikely your elementary schools ever change. Like I've had one friend who lived in an older neighborhood near downtown Aledo, and in 3 years, their kids went to 3 different elementary schools because we were growing so fast and they were having to adjust the attendance zones. So I don't expect that to occur for your kids in elementary, but it could occur, or there could be an adjustment between now and when your kid ends up in middle school or high school. So something to think about if you're making long-term plans, but for the next couple of years, probably not a big deal. Okay, now you can't do one of these videos without talking about price ranges. And now on the lower end, the actual entry point for the neighborhoods are going to be roughly equivalent probably. I mean, you can get a new construction home in the high 400s-ish, mid to high 400s right now while builders are cutting deals. And you're going to be able to do something similar in Walsh. They're going to be different products though. So the actual entry point is going to be roughly equivalent. If you want a small single family home that's like one story, you're going to pay a little bit more in Walsh than you do in Parks because Parks does not have the townhomes, the cottage homes, the garden homes, whatever you want to call them. They're going to have to just all single family homes. And so that's something to think about. And then the actual like spread of values is going to be tighter in Parks of Aledo as a whole. So really on the upper end of Parks of Aledo, you're going to have probably 1.2-ish, I would expect. I did have a client buy near the upper end of Parks of Aledo, really nice home by Job Homes, one of my favorite builders in the Aledo area. And it was a little over, it's just a smidge over $1 million. And he was near the upper limits. And we knew that. We knew that he was going to have one of the nicest homes in the neighborhoods. And he was okay with that, right? And not the most expensive house in all of Parks of Aledo, but I mean, he's going to have one of the few homes with a built-in fridge. Like that's kind of a differentiator. You can't just do a cheap home with a built-in fridge, but you know, that's typically an indicator of the overall quality build and the amenities of that home. So that's something to think about. Whereas in Walsh, you have basically that same spread in the normal Walsh neighborhood. And then you have Klein Park, which is a step up and above that. Probably mid-million marks on the low end, like 1.5 maybe on the low end, up to over 2 million. So that's something to think about depending on the price point you're looking in. Like if you want like a really great neighborhood with lots of stuff going on, whether that's the amenities or the trails, wherever that is, you want stuff and you want a great neighborhood and you don't want to be on a couple of acres and you're looking at that more custom end home that has essentially city utilities, Klein Park is a great spot to start looking. Because lots of other homes in that price point in the little area are on acreage with well and septic. So Parks of Aledo does not have a Walsh equivalent. Now there is a neighborhood coming in behind Parks of Aledo, Aledo Rivers, and that's probably going to be on the low end 2 million plus. So that's going to be, Aledo River is going to start at the higher end of Klein Park, and it's going to be it's a different neighborhood. It's just right next to Parks of Aledo. So maybe you could think of it similar, but like that's very early stages. Only a few homes have been built and sold, and most of those are custom. They're not like spec homes that are available. And most of the lots are owned by builders. I know the developer, and I had a client asking about it, and it wasn't anything personal, but he was just saying, hey, I'm going to let builders have the first shot at buying these lots in bulk from me before I offer them individually. And basically they were all bought. That's going to be builders holding onto those to build their own custom homes for people who contract with them. So something to think about, but that's going to be the price range. For the most part, Parks of Aledo is going to be a tighter spread without a true luxury option, but still good homes. Okay, so who fits best in each neighborhood? So Parks of Aledo is going to be a maybe a better fit for those of you who really want to have your own pool and don't really care about going to like a community pool. If you want to prioritize kind of the outdoor living, the parks, the playgrounds, the trails, that's all going to be Parks of Aledo. Both neighborhoods are going to have good community, lots of young families, lots of people you can become friends with. But if you want to feel more like you are Aledo based in your living, right? Aledo shopping, Aledo dining, you want to do all that kind of stuff, Parks of Aledo. Like you're actually in Aledo city limits, one of the few neighborhoods. So that's going to be there. If you want like a neighborhood that's almost complete with very little continued build out, Parks of Aledo. If you don't want an HOA that could increase, Parks of Aledo. Now, what about Walsh? So who's Walsh a good fit for? Walsh is going to be a good fit for those who want like built-in community events. So Walsh has like neighborhood events it puts on as a part of the development, right? They're going to have the top of the line amenities, right? You don't have to have a pool in your backyard. You have the neighborhood pool. You have the sports courts. You have all this other stuff. You know, if you want the fiber or the front lawn maintenance, that's going to be Walsh. And then the other thing is if you want maybe true luxury, right? That's going to be one thing that Parks really doesn't have, and you can't do too much because you'll price yourself out of the neighborhood, even if you do build a custom home. So that would be like Klein Park and Walsh Ranch. And then if you kind of want more of the golf cart vibe, that's going to be Walsh Ranch. If you want the elementary school, like right there in the neighborhood, as close as Coder is to Parks of Aledo, Walsh Ranch is more central. It's actually part of the neighborhood. You don't have to navigate, in a ninth grade campus and a high school campus. Like that's going to be a clear winner for Walsh. And you might actually desire one or two of this and a couple of that. And it might come down to other factors like we've already discussed in the video, but that's for you to decide. And honestly, a lot of people end up looking at both first and then decide after seeing it which one really they prefer. So you don't have to make your decision before you come into town and start taking a look. Looking at both is a great option. And so you can actually experience the feel of the neighborhood and the amenities and everything else. So if you are moving to Aledo area and you've never visited either neighborhood, put in the comment section which one you're leaning towards right now. But more importantly, if you are thinking about relocating or those plans are already in the works, we need to get you on site. We need you to see both neighborhoods. We need you to see homes in both neighborhoods along with the amenities. So if you have a trip scheduled, reach out to me sooner rather than later. Let's get some time on the books. Let's get a phone call in advance. Let's make sure that you are using your time as effectively as possible as you plan your family's relocation to the Aledo area. I'd love to assist in that. So let me get some time on my calendar to make sure that I can spend some time with you, help you make a wise decision for you and your family. And until next time, I'll see you then.